Thank you for tuning in to this demo presentation on the roots of Filthadelphia. Many of you are aware that Philadelphia has a long-running chronic trash and litter problem. And honestly, even though I've been involved in environmental justice work for over 10 or 14 years now, I didn't really zero in on the trash issue until I started working with Mural Arts Philadelphia and with their program called Trash Academy, which really was working closely with neighbors and with people in the community who were really, really angry and upset at the constant trash and constant litter in their neighborhoods, and the fact that it was been so difficult to get any kind of response from city government. Thankfully, that's starting to change thanks to citizen activism and people really, really, really pushing the city government hard on getting things like street sweeping and other, normal trash, mitigation strategies that other cities have had for decades. And what we're going to get into in this presentation, in this demo presentation, is why does Philadelphia look the way it does? Why do we have such a chronic and such a long-standing problem with trash that seems to be almost intractable, like it seems almost unsolvable? But was Philadelphia always like this? Let's find out. So some of you may be surprised to learn that Philadelphia was once known as one of the cleanest cities in the country. Yes, indeed. So the city of Philadelphia held an annual cleanup, paint up, fix up campaign for more than 50 years. And for 12 consecutive years, from 1947 to 1959, it was named the national cleanest town. Now, I know some of you may think this is unbelievable, but believe me, after my presentations are completed, I always send out a fact sheet so people can, verify everything I've been saying. And I'm also going to be posting like a curriculum outline on my website so you can actually see some of the sources. But yes, this is true. From 1947 to 1959, Philadelphia was known or was named the national cleanest town. That's in stark contrast to what we know about Philadelphia today, where we now have this nickname, this unfortunate nickname of Filthadelphia. So how did we get here? What changed between 1940s and 1950s and today? Well, we also have to remember that Philadelphia had one of the country's first street sweeping programs. And you can see on the right-hand side, there's a big hullabaloo around street cleaning and keeping the streets clean, making sure that Philadelphia kept up its reputation as a clean city. This was a big deal back in the day. I mean, Philadelphia was very known for having clean streets. But something started to happen in the early part of the 20th century. So we had the Great Migration, and this is something that I'm going to explore in more detail in the larger presentation, talking about how demographic changes have led to some of the social problems that we're facing today. And that when you had millions of Black people fleeing the South, fleeing Jim Crow, fleeing terrorism, looking for work, trying to, be able to live in a way that they could not live down South, they started moving out of the, rural Southern states into the big cities of the Northeast, Midwest, and up the West Coast. And Philadelphia was a major destination for many people who were fleeing the South. So this led to huge demographic changes here in Philadelphia. This is from a website on the Great Migration in Philadelphia. So by 1930, African Americans owned more homes in Philadelphia than in any other city north of the Mason-Dixon line. So that just shows you that so many people were moving here. So between 1910 and 1920, Philadelphia's African American population soared from just 84,000 to 134,000. And then by 1930, the population of Black people in Philadelphia was 219,000. strong. And so this is what led to Philadelphia having the highest home ownership rates for Black people in the country. And then there was a second Great Migration. It happened in several different waves. So the first one was around World War I. And then there was a second Great Migration between 1940, 1950, 1970. So the population soared from 250,000 to around 655,000 in 1970. So Philadelphia went from being a mostly white city to being a city that was very mixed and with a large population of African Americans. So what I'm asserting here is that the change in demographics in Philadelphia is part of what led to a lack of concern about some of the neighborhoods where people were living because of racism, because of systemic racism. And so redlining plays a big part in this story. So the practice of redlining dates back to the 1930s. Two federal housing agencies, the Homeowners Loan Corporation and the Federal Housing Administration, they colluded with the federal government to deny loans and deny other financial assistance to people living in red line neighborhoods. So if you lived in one of these neighborhoods that was marked as red, this is basically saying that you are living in an undesirable neighborhood and you are also an undesirable person because you live there. So the redlining was based on people's race and ethnicity. So the more Black and brown people who lived in a neighborhood, the lower it would be rated, and then it would be redlined or yellow lined, depending on how many undesirable elements lived in the neighborhood. So what you saw happening during the Great Migration was all of these people were moving to Philadelphia to search for a better life. And the response they were getting from the government and from corporations was basically more of the same racism that they were fleeing from in the southern states, except that this racism was not this overt in your face, calling you the N-word, sicking a dog on you or turning a fire hydrant on you. This was the racism of the law, the racism of corporations, the racism of denying you what you need, knowing that in the future, this is going to be a major problem, right? So Philadelphia being an industrial city also contributed to this problem, because once these industrial jobs went away, once you started having people leaving the city, many of these neighborhoods started falling into disrepair. And because of the history of Philadelphia, because of this racialized situation where you had many people of color moving into the city, and then you had many white people fleeing the city for the suburbs. And once the tax base of the city evaporated or fell through, many of the city services that were once available were withdrawn, or, like the street sweeping. Many people don't know that street sweeping used to happen all the time in Philadelphia when we had a mostly white population. Most of us are used to seeing street sweeping in the downtown areas and the commercial corridors. But if you look on the other side here, this picture, this is, I think, this Kensington. This is what's happening in some places in our city. Some places in our city have been totally neglected and left to fend for themselves. And one thing I am happy to report is that there has been a limited street sweeping program that was, it was trial ballooned a year or two ago, and they're bringing it back this year. So that the activism that's been happening in the community, the advocacy from people who are really fed up about the state of their streets, this has led to some changes that we will get into in the longer presentation.